Thank you. Thanks, Soumitra. That very comprehensive. I'm sure all of you know that there are 2 million ASHA workers in the country, which is the frontline workers in the grassroots, and there needs to be a proper consolidated effort to digitally enable them to serve the purpose that they are meant to. If I come to Dr. Anantha, this is peace, sustainable development. Do you see a lot of noise of social media? We are one of the second largest country on social media. Everybody, even the dharna couple of days before in Delhi, they wanted to be on social media to be seen, although they came from the villages. What are we doing? I mean, what do you see from your perspective?
Thank you very much. Well, let me try to answer that question, but put it within the perspective of the broad area that the Institute works. It's the Mahatma Gandhi Institute of Education for Peace and Sustainable. So our primary channel that we use is education, and I'll intervene through that particular aspects. Let me put the challenges and then sort of talk about how the IT is able to and how we are kind of looking at IT as a way of providing some of the solutions to those challenges. I'm not sure how many of you are aware of, but there is an international process that's been going over the last number of years to develop a global set of what we call the Sustainable Development Goals, which would be finalized next October at the General Assembly in New York. And out of that, that's goal number 4 is on education, inclusive, equitable education, and lifelong learning. And within that, it was interesting that countries have started to acknowledge how we have become a very interconnected society globally. And so you have actually within those goals an education for global citizenship. There was this motion that a lot of countries have for the past have been very national, sovereign, that kind of nation state, and for the first time you have a collective understanding that the problems that we are facing now are actually so interconnected that we need to have that communication and links. And education plays a major role in that perspective, and especially with the youth. Statistics, I think more than half the global population is now between the ages of 15 to 34. And out of that, a huge proportion of that is actually in this country. So India is actually the largest group of youth in the world. So now the challenges is, in terms of education, how do we get to the masses? Because if I look at the Indian statistics itself, it says right from the very start, 4% of young children never get into the school. 58% dropout. I'm not talking about the literacy rate, so I'm sort of talking about dropout rates, which are more important, I think. So around 58%, 60% dropout on primary school. And the really staggering one is 90% drop out of school. So only 10% go on to tertiary education and stuff. So that's a massive loss of human capital, if I can say that. And I think that's a lot of issues on teacher training. The old way of teaching has to change. And I think ICT has a major role in playing with this. But MOOCs is just one. The massive open online courses is just one. And there's some criticisms coming out of that approach. But I think there are lots of other techniques and methodologies that have been developed using IT technology. And when I look at the notion of peace and sustainability, the real focus is to get the students connected, to have peer-to-peer exchange and dialogue. And that's extremely difficult using the old systems of schools and stuff. That's very place-based. And with ICT, spatial space is no longer a problem, and you can connect them. And there's a number of initiatives, one which is called Scholar, developed by some educational psychologists at the University of Illinois, where they've done some interesting studies on how they see changes evolving out of students as the dialogue increases over spatial, and how they start to understand cultures, how they understand. We're not talking about toleration anymore, we're talking about inclusiveness. How do you actually include others? And the notion of poverty, when you look at the way people define it from different perspectives, it's interesting to see how different it is. Corruption, also interesting. So this whole notion of dialogue, and I think the ICT provides one of the major ways of bringing that dialogue. And then that is the way that we start developing the notion of peace, because we understand empathy. One of the challenges that we see through the ICT and moving away from the way that the traditional educational systems, where it's more transferring knowledge, is the process of learning, what we call transformative learning. How do you instill the notion of reflexivity? Self-reflexivity as collective reflexivity. The other one is convictional. And then the third one is agency, behavioral change. Agency has to be extreme, and I think the ICT provides that kind of opportunities. But together with the traditional systems of still, if there are many teachers out there, we're not sort of saying that the teachers are an outdated and a dinosaur. They are extremely important, but in terms of how to train them as well within this new technology platform.
Yes, we also want our teachers to go to school sometimes. One of the very interesting points that you said, 90% dropout, and I was just thinking, all these 90% dropout will have mobiles and connectivity, So, it's very interesting that how do we use the medium that they are into as an educational platform or exchange of knowledge platform. Yeah, that's very interesting. Thank you very much. Chat, you have lived in Southeast Asia, you have worked in a global organization who talks about rights and so on and so forth. And you are a very good also representative of the region, here. How do you see this happening? Everybody looks at India as one of the poorest country, one of the most connected country, one of the most on social media. We are like most everywhere, We are also, having most poor, and even on the development indices, we are, highest from the bottom, one of the highest from the bottom or something like that. So how do you see this happening here, in the buzz of all this?
Thank you. It's very good to be here and to hear also perspectives from India. I think we can learn from there. I come from the Philippines, and there are similar issues. In Southeast Asia, it's a very diverse, even in relation to what you have been talking about here, like access. I mean, you talk about Myanmar, which is just coming onto the internet world, and what I've heard recently is that one of the things that they're definitely doing is trying to have public access all over the country, like thousands of internet cafes, public access, which I think is a very important point when we talk about access. Yes, there will be broadband, and I agree, it's only a matter of time, and there will be, motivation could be from private sector because of course that's part of the profit, the bottom line. But I do think that when we talk about access, inclusivity, as what we've heard today, is very important. And part of that inclusivity are having models that are not just private models, but has to be public access models. And I think that's where the state or governments, even in my country, it's very important because there's some neglect around that. It seems like something that is already passé because you now have mobiles. Everyone has a gadget, 2 or 3 gadgets. But I think it's very different when you talk about access across the board. And I do think then that you need to look at also constraints. Constraints around inclusivity has to always be considered. Because I do think that even when we talk about services, let's say information services, demand is very important. And sometimes you do have government services. I was just in Bangkok 2 weeks ago, and there was at the SCAP, and there was discussion about e-government and how that happens in the region. And one of the most important points I think that came out is that some of the e-government services have to be designed so that you're looking at what citizens require. It's not about what data government has to provide, but it's also about what your citizens need. And I think that whole ecosystem of information, how people behave, what kinds of needs they have in terms of information, has to be in the design. My country, for example, Philippines recently won I think it was in September, the Gold Award around open governance. We're a member of the Open Governance Partnership, and that was around the budgeting. It's called bottom-up budgeting. So it's like we have about 1,500. It's like your panchayats, no? Your village level.
Village councils.
Yeah, and we call them barangays, and they're involved in budgeting. So the government set up this system where you can participate in the national budgeting. So it's bottom-up budgeting. But one of the issues we have, which was quite successful, but the issues then we have though around that is this: we do not have RTI. It's still being debated because there are vested interests around the right to information. So I think that governance is the last point I want to make. The governance, the level of governance, and your policy environment is very important when we talk about questions of access, inclusivity, and obligations and rights, which I think you said earlier. Because now we are heading into uncharted territory to some extent with the development of all of these services. And I do think that the enabling environment and policy is very important.
Thank you. So very nice to hear that. Something to learn bottom-up, budget planning and governance planning. We have Panchayati Raj here for, and we have a similar kind of situation here also. But we need to see how it also works. Rajneesh, Internet Society, as old as Internet. I remember in 2003 when WSIS, World Summit on Information Society, was created. Kofi Annan said that we need to move towards creating an informed society, information society. I see Internet Society, but I don't see information society all over the world. What are the challenges that you see, and especially you were born in India, work in Singapore and Australia, and belong to an organization not born in India but born to the Indians.
Thanks, Osama. I know you want to claim me as your own, but anyway. Look, why aren't we an information society? And I think what occurs to me is what was said earlier before about why it's taking so long to deploy the fiber network across India. Yes, it'll happen because it'll happen in due course. That's just the way things happen in India. But the issue for me is, but what is the opportunity cost of the delay? If it's going to take 5 years, 10 years, 7 years, whatever number of years it takes, within that period, the rest of the world is progressing. Things are moving ahead. Right? Osama gave the example of that protest recently where people from the village came and they wanted to be on social media. The reason they wanted to be on social media is because they know this thing called social media, it exists. They don't necessarily have access to it, they don't necessarily use it, etc., because they're information poor. They don't have, why they don't have access to it, there might be no connectivity in the area, maybe they can't afford it, maybe they don't have devices to access the technology, etc. The reasons can be many. If you look at most countries in the world, Osama mentioned the WSIS process, the World Summit on Information Society. There were two meetings, 2003 and 2005, and from that was born the Internet Governance Forum, which has been an annual event for the last several years now. All these fora internationally, they talk about what the Internet is and what it could do to people, how it can empower people. What you see in these awards, for example, is some great innovation which really are never recognized outside of this circle here. I work across the Asia Pacific, and as an example, last week I was in Korea at a UN meeting, and there we were discussing, the Millennium Development Goals are coming to an end next year, and what's the next step? So now they're calling it the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and there's work towards that. And the question that we asked ourselves was, there was a room, governments from around the region as well as some subject matter experts, trying to discuss where do we go from here. But, and people from multiple sectors, from health, from education, from and the energy sector, from the financial sector, etc. But everyone kept on coming back to one thing, that we need to build the information society in order to achieve whatever we need to achieve into the future. So to bring developing countries out of the state they're in, and to rapidly bring them out of that state. The only way they can do that is through the use of information technology. Why haven't we become an information society? I think there's many, many reasons. Obviously, financial reasons are one of them, but as well, from what I see around at least this region and some other regions of the world, is also the issue of political will. It's great to give the, bhashan sab dete hai, but karte koi nahi hai. That's the issue, right? So people talk about it, politicians and bureaucrats will make big statements, etc., but the implementation of the statements, that's either left to someone else to do, which never materializes, or the government changes and we start all over again. And it happens across the world, particularly in the developing world. So I think there's a few challenges we need to meet, and the solution, I think, is to realize that we have a collective commitment to ensuring that will happen. It's not about politics, it's not about competition or someone winning or someone losing. We all need to work together. And that's why I think the NGO community in particular is a good balancing act for us, where they can keep us, I actually want to use a term that was used in the Australian Parliament quite often, but I think it's a bit too rude to use. So it's keeping X honest. And my friend Dave would know what I'm referring to here. The word starts with B. So anyway, I'll leave it at that, but I think there's still a lot of work to do. The NGO community, I think, for one, is an important stakeholder in that, because you do provide a balancing act for everything else that happens, be it commercial interests or be it political interests and so on. So thanks.
Yeah, that's... Yes, we will come back. We have about 20 minutes. We are going to circulate the mic to have 1 minute from each one of you to say what you want to say, and in the light of all this discussion, and then another 10 minutes we will have the question from the audience. So, but do know that 1 minute of yours. So, I have a couple of points that I would certainly like any of you to highlight is, and these are some of the messages and tweets that are coming, is India moving on a developmental rail where one rail is India and another is internet? They never meet each other, as far as the larger society is concerned. This is one. The second is maybe Suku might say that is the world is end for media. It is only going to be social media. The future of media is social media and more participative media and citizen participative media. Similarly, the role of NGOs, and we know that for the governance and from the access for all, when we talk technology, technology by nature is very top-down. But if you see technology as a medium, then it becomes, a part of your own. But when you go down, you seriously see that technology cannot solve all the problem, because the poverty is the same, the person with the same, the problems are the same. That how do you integrate this understanding of the people who are at the grassroots level? And that is the reason why civil society is extremely important. These are some of the things, but Aruna, can we start with you with 1 minute of your point of view to get into the, again, go to the audience to have questions.